I still remember the first morning I walked into that office like it was yesterday. The smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room, the constant hum of the copy machine, and the way everyone seemed too busy to notice the new face walking in. I clutched my tote bag like a lifeline and tried to convince myself I belonged there. I had worked hard for this job, studied late nights, juggled side gigs to get enough experience, and finally landed a position in a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. To me, it wasn't just a job. It was proof that I had made it through years of struggle. At first, everything felt like a fresh start. I wanted to befriend my co-workers, bring in donuts on Fridays, maybe even decorate my cubicle with small plants and photos of my dog. I craved a little stability, and I thought I had found it. Then there was her, Jessica. She had the kind of confidence that filled a room before she even opened her mouth. Her heels clicked sharply across the tile. Her perfume lingered in the hallways, and her laughter always seemed just a little too loud, like she wanted to make sure everyone noticed her. At first, I admired her. She had been with the company for a couple of years, and people seemed to respect her. I thought, maybe if I stayed close to her, she'd guide me, show me the ropes, help me grow. But admiration slowly turned into unease. It began with small things. A side comment in meetings when I presented an idea. She'd tilt her head, smile faintly, and say something like, "That's cute, but we tried that last year and it didn't work." Or she'd repeat my suggestion louder a few minutes later, phrasing it slightly differently, and suddenly everyone acted like it was brilliant. The first time it happened, I brushed it off. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. But the second and third time made my stomach twist. Still, I told myself to keep my head down and focus on my work. After all, I needed this job. My parents always reminded me not to make waves. Do your best and people will notice, they'd say. So I kept trying. I came in early, stayed late, and poured myself into every project. There were nights I'd sit in that cubicle with nothing but the dim light of my desk lamp, eating cold takeout while finalising a campaign plan. My heart would race with both exhaustion and hope. If I proved myself, if I made my mark, maybe things would get easier. But Jessica seemed determined not to let that happen. I remember one meeting vividly. We were pitching ideas for a big client, a national chain that could bring the firm a lot of revenue. I had spent days putting together slides, double-checking stats, even practicing my presentation in front of the mirror at home. My hands trembled as I connected my laptop to the projector. Before I could even get through my second slide, Jessica interrupted. "Actually," she said, leaning forward with that same polite but cutting smile, "I think what she's trying to say is..." And then she launched into her own explanation of my idea, twisting it until it sounded like hers. Everyone nodded along, impressed, while I stood there frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to speak up, to claim what was mine, but the words caught in my throat. I sat down, cheeks burning, pretending to jot notes, while inside I was breaking. That night I drove home in silence. The city lights blurred as tears filled my eyes. I asked myself over and over why she hated me so much, what I had done to deserve it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about me. It was about her needing control. Needing to shine even if it meant dimming someone else's light. That realization didn't make it hurt less. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I've had at any job. I kept trying to convince myself that Jessica wasn't intentionally targeting me, that maybe I was just being sensitive, but the signs were too clear to ignore. She had this way of inserting herself into everything I did. If I sent out a draft to the team, she would accidentally leave me off the reply chain when she gave her notes, so I'd be the last to know about changes. If I scheduled a client call, She would conveniently pop in and take over the conversation, leaving me to sit there awkwardly, nodding as if I were her assistant instead of her equal. It ate at me quietly. I'd go home at night, collapse on my couch still in work clothes, and replay the day in my head like a bad movie. I'd hear her voice, that clipped, condescending tone she used whenever she clarified my ideas. I'd see the faces of my co-workers, their eyes sliding past me and focusing on her as though I were invisible. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled through clenched teeth and told myself it was temporary. If I worked harder, if I pushed past this, people would notice the truth eventually. At least that's what I hoped. Then came the project that changed everything. Our firm was hired to create a campaign for a trendy new restaurant chain opening locations across the city. It was a big deal, and my manager trusted me enough to let me take the lead on the first draft. I remember the excitement rushing through me as I brainstormed ideas late into the night, scribbling notes on scraps of paper, sketching out visuals, even humming little taglines under my breath. It felt like the first time I could finally prove what I was capable of. I poured every ounce of creativity into that proposal. By the time I was done, my dining table looked like a war zone. Coffee cups, highlighters, open laptops, and pages scattered everywhere. I barely slept that week, but I didn't care. I was proud of what I created. On the morning of the presentation, I came in early, clutching my carefully organised binder. My hand shook as I set everything up, and then, just an hour before the meeting, I noticed something odd. Jessica had a folder on her desk with the same charts I had created, the same numbers I had pulled at 3 a.m. My stomach dropped. At first I told myself it was coincidence, but when she opened her mouth in the meeting, I knew. She was presenting my proposal, word for word. The same phrasing, the same structure, even the same silly tagline I had scribbled in a half-dream state. My blood ran cold. I wanted to stand up and shout, to call her out in front of everyone, but I froze. Fear held me down like chains. I sat there, heart pounding, as she stole everything I had worked for. Afterward, my manager shook her hand, praising her brilliance, while I slipped out of the room, barely able to breathe. That night I cried harder than I had in years. It wasn't just about the project. It was about the way she had managed to make me feel small, like nothing I did mattered, like I was just a shadow in my own story. After that meeting, something inside me broke. I dragged myself home that night, still in my blazer, makeup smudged from the tears I'd been too exhausted to wipe away. My apartment felt smaller than usual, like the walls were pressing in. And I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my laptop, wondering if I even had the strength to keep going. I thought about quitting, about packing up my desk the next day and walking out without looking back. But then I remembered the bills stacked on my kitchen counter, the student loans I was still paying off, the pride in my mum's voice when she told people her daughter finally had a real career. I couldn't give up. Not yet. The next morning, I forced myself to smile as I walked through the office doors. I told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just what corporate life was. Cutthroat, competitive, unfair. But deep down, I knew it wasn't supposed to feel like this. It wasn't supposed to feel like someone was actively trying to destroy me. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to thrive. She strutted down the halls with her coffee in hand, tossing casual greetings like she owned the place. She even had the audacity to wink at me sometimes, as if we were sharing some private joke. It made my skin crawl. The worst part was how other people bought into it. They saw her confidence, her polished delivery, and assumed she was the brains behind everything, and I I was just the quiet girl in the corner, the one who stayed late but didn't shine in the spotlight. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this industry. Maybe my ideas weren't as good as I thought. The self-doubt crept in like a poison, dulling the fire that had once kept me going. Then came the breaking point. We were assigned to work together on a smaller client, a local boutique that wanted a fresh social media campaign. It wasn't a big account, but to me it mattered. I spent hours crafting mock-ups, picking colours and writing captions that felt authentic. I even tested different filters on my own phone to see what would catch attention. When we presented to the client, I let Jessica speak first, trying to be professional. She opened her laptop and, to my horror, began showing the very designs I had created, the same ones I had emailed to her just 2 days earlier, asking for her feedback. She claimed them as her own, smiling sweetly as if she had pulled an all-nighter to produce them. My chest tightened. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, my nails digging into my palm under the table. But once again, I stayed silent. The client nodded, impressed, and I felt invisible all over again. After the meeting, I confronted her quietly in the hallway. My voice trembled as I asked why she had taken credit for my work. She tilted her head, smiled that infuriating smile, and whispered, "This is how the game is played. If you can't handle it, maybe you're not cut out for this." Her words cut deeper than any blade. I went home that night with a decision forming in my heart. I wasn't going to let her win forever. Something had to change. The next few weeks felt like I was walking on eggshells. Every time I sent an email, I double-checked the recipient list to make sure Jessica couldn't twist my words. Every file I saved, I kept copies on a flash drive at home, just in case she decided to borrow something again. It was exhausting, living in constant defense mode. My stomach would knot every morning as I rode the elevator up, clutching my coffee like it was armour. I hated how much space she took up in my mind, but slowly I started to notice little cracks in her perfect act. She was slick, yes, but sometimes too slick. She'd rush through explanations, skipping details because she hadn't actually done the work. She'd charm clients with her smile, but then stumble when they asked follow-up questions. I kept my head down, but I watched. I observed every slip, every half-truth, every time she tried to patch over holes in her stories. And I started documenting. I saved emails, drafts, time-stamped versions of presentations. At first, it felt paranoid, like I was building a case no one had asked me to make. But something in my gut told me I'd need proof one day. Meanwhile, my personal life was falling apart. Friends stopped inviting me out because I was always too busy. My mum's calls went unanswered because I couldn't bear to admit how miserable I was. Even my dog seemed to sense my stress, curling up by the door whenever I dragged myself in late at night. I felt like I was fading. Still, I clung to the idea that things couldn't stay this way forever. And then the opportunity came. A major client presentation was scheduled, one that could secure a huge account for the firm. Jessica immediately volunteered to lead it, of course, but this time I didn't back down. I had been assigned half of the work, and I wasn't about to let her erase me again. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scribbled notes, rehearsing every word I planned to say. My heart pounded with equal parts fear and determination. When the morning came, I wore my favourite blazer, the one that always made me feel a little braver, and I walked into that conference room with my head held higher than usual. Jessica smiled at me across the table, that smug little curve of her lips, as if she had already won. But for the first time, I didn't shrink. Something inside me had shifted. The conference room was colder than usual, or maybe it was just my nerves making me shiver. The long glass table reflected the fluorescent lights, and I could see my own face in the surface, pale and tense. Clients filed in, shaking hands, setting down their laptops and water bottles. I took a deep breath, reminding myself I had prepared for this moment. Jessica started with her usual flair, her voice smooth and confident as she introduced the concept. She clicked through slides that looked polished but shallow, full of flashy buzzwords without much substance. At first, the clients nodded politely, but soon their questions started poking holes. Jessica stumbled, glossing over details she clearly hadn't researched. I felt my chest tighten as she looked toward me, expecting me to step in quietly and save her like I had so many times before. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I leaned forward, cleared my throat, and calmly answered the client's question with specific numbers, data I had triple-checked, and examples from my research. Their eyes shifted to me. I saw curiosity spark in their faces, the kind of look that said, "Finally, someone knows what they're talking about." Jessica's smile faltered. For the rest of the presentation, I spoke more, not aggressively, but steadily, with confidence I didn't even know I had. The clients engaged with me, nodding, scribbling notes, asking follow-ups. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. By the end, the lead client shook my hand firmly and said, "Great work, this feels strong." My cheeks burned, but in a good way. It was the first real validation I'd received since starting this job. Jessica's eyes darted to me, sharp and cold, though she forced a tight smile for the clients. I could feel her rage simmering just beneath the surface. That afternoon, back at my desk, she stormed over. Her voice was low, almost a hiss, as she leaned in. "Don't ever undermine me like that again," she said. My heart pounded, but I didn't look away. "I wasn't undermining you. I was doing my job." For once, the words came out steady, not shaking. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time since I met her, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She just glared, turned on her heel, and walked off. That night, I sat in my apartment replaying everything. I didn't know what would come next, but I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe I wasn't powerless after all. Maybe I could fight back. The shift after that meeting was subtle at first, but I could feel it in the air. A few of my co-workers started stopping by my desk more often, asking me questions or seeking my input. They had seen how I handled myself with the client, and for once it felt like maybe my voice carried weight. It was a fragile kind of recognition, but it meant everything to me. Jessica, though, was not taking it well. She became sharper, colder. Her emails to me dripped with fake politeness, the kind where every please and thanks felt like an insult. She copied managers unnecessarily, making it look like I was constantly under supervision. If I made the smallest typo, she highlighted it in red and sent it back with a note saying, "Let's try to be more careful." It was humiliating, but instead of crumbling, I started collecting. I saved every email, every draft, every timestamp. I wasn't sure what I was building, but I knew instinctively that I needed a record. The pressure was relentless. Some nights I'd leave the office so late that the cleaning crew had already vacuumed around my desk. I'd walk out into the quiet city streets, clutching my bag, wondering how much longer I could stand it. But that little spark from the client meeting kept me going. I had proof, finally, that I wasn't just imagining my worth, and I wasn't about to let her take that away. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, I opened a shared drive and found a document Jessica had uploaded for a new project proposal. As I scrolled through, my stomach twisted. It was mine. Entire sections copied from the drafts I'd been working on privately, even down to the examples I had scribbled at home. She hadn't even bothered to change much. It was theft, Plain and simple. My hand shook as I printed out both versions, the one with my timestamps and the one she had uploaded. For the first time, I felt less like a victim and more like someone holding a weapon. That evening, as I sat on my couch with papers spread around me, I realised I had reached a line I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't going to let her steal one more thing from me. The next morning I walked into the office with the printed copies tucked carefully in a folder at the bottom of my bag. I don't think anyone could tell, but inside I was trembling. It felt like carrying around a secret no one else knew. A weapon hidden in plain sight. Part of me wanted to storm straight into my manager's office and slam the papers on the desk, demanding justice, but another part of me was terrified. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was being petty or worse, trying to stir up drama? I knew Jessica had allies in the office. She was charming when she wanted to be, and people liked being on her good side. I couldn't risk walking in without the perfect moment, so I waited. For days I kept my head down, gathering more. Every time Jessica tried to cut me out of an email chain, I saved the evidence. Every time she sent me feedback that was actually my own wording repeated back to me, I took screenshots. At night, my apartment became a war room. My coffee table was buried under piles of notes, binders, and colour-coded folders. I barely ate real meals. Just cereal and toast. Quick things I could eat while highlighting lines of text. My dog curled up beside me as if guarding me through the chaos. It was exhausting, but it gave me purpose. Meanwhile, Jessica seemed to sense something had shifted. Her smile grew tighter. Her eyes sharper when they landed on me across the office. One afternoon, she cornered me by the break room. "You've been awfully quiet," she said, sipping her latte. "Careful. People might start to think you're not pulling your weight." I wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead I just stared back, silent. It was the first time I realised she couldn't read me anymore. And that unnerved her. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Another big client pitch was scheduled, and both Jessica and I were assigned to contribute. The night before, I stayed up until 3 finalising my part. By the time I walked into that boardroom, I felt prepared in a way I never had before. Jessica started her segment with her usual glossy confidence. But I could see the cracks, and when the client asked a question about one of the stats, she faltered. My pulse quickened as I leaned forward, calmly correcting the number with my own research. For a second the room was silent, then the client nodded at me with approval, and in that silence I knew. Her mask was starting to slip. After that pitch, things in the office felt different, almost like the tide was beginning to turn. A few co-workers who used to ignore me started stopping by my desk with questions, even casual small talk. It wasn't much, but after months of feeling invisible, it was enough to give me strength. Jessica noticed too, and she hated it. Her smile was all teeth now, her laughter too forced, like she was trying to remind everyone she still owned the room. But the truth was clear. She was slipping. She began doubling down on her games. She would accidentally send me outdated versions of documents, so I'd waste hours working with the wrong numbers. She started pointing out minor errors in my reports during meetings. Little things that didn't matter but made me look careless. And of course, she kept trying to pass off my ideas as her own whenever she could. But now I wasn't just enduring it, I was preparing. Every slip, every trick, every lie, I kept a record. My personal flash drive was like a vault, filled with drafts, emails and notes. At night I would spread them across my kitchen table, sorting them like puzzle pieces. My apartment smelled like stale coffee and highlighters, but I didn't care. It felt like I was building armour piece by piece. My body was tired, but my mind was sharper than ever. Then came the day everything cracked open. Jessica had been asked to present a quarterly update to our senior managers. It was supposed to be a straightforward report, numbers, projections, goals. But when she pulled up her slides, I felt my stomach drop. They weren't hers. They were mine. I recognized the formatting instantly, the way I organized the graphs, even the colour scheme I had picked while half asleep one night. She had lifted the entire thing, my hands clenched under the table as she spoke smoothly, pretending she had done the work. But this time, I didn't just sit there. I waited until one of the managers asked a question about a detail she couldn't answer. Jessica's eyes darted nervously, searching for words. My pulse pounded as I leaned forward and said, calmly but clearly, I can explain that. I was the one who ran those numbers. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. Jessica froze, her face flushing as if I had yanked the rug out from under her. I laid out the data, confident and precise, showing exactly how I had built the report. My voice didn't shake, and for the first time I saw doubt flicker in my manager's eyes as he looked at her. It was small, but it was enough. That night, when I got home, I collapsed onto my couch and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. For once, I hadn't let her silence me. I had spoken, and the truth had slipped through. After that meeting, whispers began to spread. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, but I could feel it in the way people glanced at me differently, the way conversations paused when Jessica walked by. She had always carried herself like the star of the show, but now the spotlight seemed to shift ever so slightly, and she didn't know how to handle it. At first, she tried to smooth it over with charm, throwing compliments my way in front of others, pretending we were some kind of dynamic duo. "We make a great team," she'd say with a wide grin, while her nails dug into my arm when no one was looking. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. She'd corner me in hallways, her voice low and sharp, accusing me of trying to humiliate her. "You think you're clever?" she hissed once, blocking my path near the copier. "Don't forget who people listen to around here." My hands shook, but I held her stare. I was done being scared. "Then maybe you should start giving them a reason to listen," I said softly before walking away. For the first time, I felt her power over me crack. But she wasn't going down without a fight. Within days, she escalated. She tampered with files on the shared drive, deleting sections of my work and then pretending she didn't know what happened. She whispered to colleagues that I was struggling, planting seeds of doubt. She even tried to take credit for late-night emails I sent, forwarding them to managers with her comments at the top, like she had been leading the work all along. It was exhausting, like playing a game of chess where every move mattered, and one mistake could ruin everything. But this time, I was ready. Every deleted file, every manipulated email. I had backups, screenshots, and timestamps. My flash drive had become my lifeline, proof that I wasn't imagining her sabotage. Still, the constant battle wore me down. I barely slept, lying awake at night with my heart pounding, running through scenarios in my head. What if my managers believed her before they believed me? What if I spoke up and it backfired, leaving me jobless and branded as a troublemaker? The fear was real, but so was the anger. I thought of all the nights I'd sacrificed, the weekends spent working, the pride my family felt when I told them about my job. I wasn't going to let her destroy that. And then, finally, the moment came. A huge client presentation was scheduled. One that would decide whether the firm secured one of its biggest accounts of the year. Jessica insisted on leading it, of course, but I knew something she didn't. Her slides were riddled with errors, because for once she hadn't stolen from me. She had actually tried to do the work herself, and she had messed up, badly. The morning of that presentation, I arrived earlier than usual, clutching my notes and trying to steady my breathing. The conference room felt enormous, the long polished table shining under the fluorescent lights, and my reflection looked back at me from the glass like a stranger. I could see Jessica across the room, perfectly put together as always, flipping through her slides with that confident smirk that had haunted me for months. She looked untouchable, but I knew what was hidden inside those slides. Numbers that didn't add up, charts copied from outdated reports, claims that couldn't be supported if anyone bothered to dig deeper. I had double-checked everything the night before, and when I spotted her mistakes, my first instinct was to stay silent and let it all unfold. But then I thought about every late night, every stolen idea, every time she had smiled while pushing me into the shadows. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The clients filed in, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. Jessica launched into her presentation with her usual sparkle, her voice smooth and commanding. The kind of voice that had fooled everyone for so long. She clicked confidently through the slides, but I saw it, the flicker in her eyes when she reached the charts. She knew something was off, but she kept going, pushing through as if confidence alone could cover the cracks. Then it happened. One of the clients, a sharp older man with glasses, leaned forward and asked a simple question about one of the numbers on her slide. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Jessica froze just for a second, then tried to bluff her way through. "Oh, that's just a projection," she said lightly, waving her hand. But the client wasn't convinced. He pressed again, asking how she had calculated it. Her smile wavered. She stumbled through a half answer that didn't make sense, and the room grew uncomfortably quiet. I don't know what came over me, but I leaned forward, my voice steady, though my hands trembled under the table. "If I may," I said, and all eyes turned to me. I explained the correct calculation, laid out the actual data, and showed how it tied into our previous reports. I could feel Jessica's glare burning into me, but I kept going, calmly answering every question the clients had. With each word, I felt stronger, as if months of silence were finally unravelling. The clients nodded, impressed, and one even said, "Thank you. That clears things up." Jessica sat frozen, her knuckles white around her pen, her confidence shattered. For the rest of the presentation, the clients directed most of their questions to me, barely glancing her way. When it ended, they shook my hand warmly, thanking me for the clarity. Jessica forced a smile, but her eyes were dark, stormy, like she could barely contain her rage. As we left the room, my manager gave me a small nod, subtle, but full of meaning. For the first time, someone had seen the truth with their own eyes. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with the city lights glowing outside my window, I realised something had shifted permanently. Jessica's grip on me, on the office, was starting to slip, and I was finally free enough to push back. The fallout didn't happen all at once, but you could feel the tension building like a storm in the office. After that presentation, people looked at Jessica differently. It wasn't obvious at first. No one called her out directly. But the trust she once commanded seemed to waver. I noticed managers asking me more questions during meetings, copying me on emails they used to send only to her. She noticed too, and it drove her wild. Her temper became shorter, her fake smile harder to maintain. She started snapping at co-workers, leaving sharp notes on sticky pads, and making careless mistakes she wouldn't have made before. It was like watching her unravel thread by thread. But I stayed quiet, calm and patient. I kept my records safe, knowing the final blow was coming, and then it did. One morning, I opened my inbox to find a frantic chain of emails about a project that had gone completely wrong. A client was furious because the numbers in their campaign didn't match, and their budget was off by thousands. Jessica had led the project. She had rushed through it, ignored the details, and worst of all, she had cut me out of the loop entirely. My manager called an emergency meeting. The entire team gathered around the table, the air thick with nerves. Jessica tried to explain herself, her voice high-pitched, her excuses tumbling out too fast. She even tried to blame miscommunication with the junior staff, which was her thinly veiled way of pointing at me. That was when I knew it was time. My hand shook as I reached into my bag, pulling out the folder I'd been carrying for weeks. I laid out the emails, the drafts, the timestamps, and calmly explained how I had been excluded, how I had documented the work, and how the errors didn't come from me, but from her altering files and cutting me off. At first, the room was silent. My manager flipped through the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. Jessica sputtered, trying to interrupt, but the evidence was there in black and white. One of the senior partners finally spoke, his tone clipped. "This isn't the first concern we've had about your work, Jessica, but this is unacceptable." Her face drained of colour. For once, she had no clever words, no smile to smooth it over. The meeting ended quickly after that, and she stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the tile. I sat frozen in my chair, my heart racing, hardly able to believe what I had just done. Later that afternoon, an email went out from HR. Jessica was no longer with the company, fired, just like that. I stared at the screen, my hands covering my mouth, tears welling in my eyes. Not because I pitied her, but because it was over. The months of torment, the constant fear, it was finally over. That night, when I walked out of the office, the air felt lighter, the city brighter. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had won. The days after Jessica's firing felt strangely quiet. The office, once filled with her sharp laughter and the sound of her heels clicking across the floor, seemed calmer, lighter. People went about their work with less tension, and for the first time since I started, I could breathe. I thought I'd feel pure triumph, but the truth was more complicated. Part of me was relieved beyond words. I had stood up for myself and the truth had finally come out. But another part of me felt drained, hollow even. Months of stress had taken a toll. My body was still wired for battle, my mind expecting another jab, another insult, another stolen idea. It took weeks before I stopped glancing over my shoulder in meetings, waiting for her to cut me off. Yet with every passing day, I began to feel stronger. My co-workers slowly opened up to me more, inviting me into conversations, asking for my input. Some even confessed they had noticed what Jessica was doing all along, but hadn't wanted to get involved. It stung to hear that, but I understood. People are afraid to speak up when someone powerful is doing the pushing. Still, their words made me realise something important. I hadn't been invisible after all. People had seen me. They just hadn't stepped in. It made me promise myself that if I ever saw someone being treated the way I had been, I wouldn't stay silent. I'd speak, because silence is what allows people like Jessica to thrive. I won't lie and say everything was perfect after she left. Work was still stressful, deadlines were still tight, and some nights I still brought takeout home to eat at my cluttered kitchen table. But the difference was, I finally felt like I had earned my place. My manager even gave me the lead on a new project, something that would have gone straight to Jessica months before. When he handed it to me, he said simply, "You've proved yourself." I nearly cried right there in his office. Looking back now, I don't just see a story about a toxic co-worker who got what she deserved. I see a version of myself who almost gave up, who almost let someone else define her worth. And I see the moment I decided not to let that happen. The truth is, I didn't plan revenge. I didn't set out to destroy Jessica. All I did was protect myself, hold on to the proof, and wait for the right time. In the end, she destroyed herself with her own arrogance. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a dramatic takedown. It's surviving, standing your ground, and letting the truth shine when it finally has the chance. I think about that every time I walk past her old desk, now empty and waiting for someone new. It reminds me that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can endure more than I ever imagined. And it reminds me that no matter how much someone tries to silence you, the truth has a way of finding its voice.